Intersectional feminism is pure nonsense. Hey, it's Prince of Queens, and after reading a great article that came out today that explains the many problems of intersectional feminism as it unfolds in practice, which was written by a woman named Helen Pluckrose, who is completely reasonable and seemingly a reputable scholar who cited a large amount of numbers and their sources to illustrate that it doesn't help the people it claims to speak for. I shared the article with an intersectional feminist I know who seemingly didn't read it and tried to basically claim that the author must not really understand intersectional feminism.
What?
Honestly, I've reached my limit and I need to address something, which is that the very nature of the philosophy of intersectionality itself is the problem. It's not a few bad apples who misunderstand the idea behind intersectional feminism. The people you have to worry about are precisely the people that understand how intersectionality attempts to explain the world and believe it to be anywhere near accurate. Think about it like this. Basically, every idea starts out with a noble goal, at least if we cherry pick the best parts of it. Abrahamic religions, for example, if we look at the various teachings like loving thy neighbor and doing unto others as you would do unto yourself, these are obviously good ideas. Everybody starts out thinking that they are looking out for the little guy. But then eventually you end up with all sorts of people who are completely married to some sort of philosophy or religion, who use their religion to act like Kyle's mom from South Park when somebody either questions it or doesn't adhere to the rules.
What?
How do you get to that point? Well, in the case of the teachings of Abrahamic religions, it might have taken at least a little while, though undoubtedly there were people using Jesus's philosophies to do shitty things even while he was still alive. Though it should be of note that there are plenty of people who use Christianity as an inspiration to do good things even to this day. But numerous people have taken apart the various flaws of Christianity and how it is practiced the world over, and I am no expert on it, so I'm gonna skip past that stuff. And besides, Kyle's mom on South Park is supposed to be an uptight, middle-aged Jewish woman and not a Christian.
What?
Intersectional feminism, on the other hand, is what happened when white women dominated feminism during the civil rights movement, and some black women decided that they wanted to be included more, because they felt excluded from both black civil rights groups and feminist civil rights groups. Personally, I don't have a problem with what happened at the inception of intersectional feminism, but when they gave it a word to describe it and constructed a philosophy around that one small action and ended up giving people a gigantic list of commandments to follow, which eventually ended up with a bunch of feminists now acting like this all the time, and if you aren't an intersectional feminist, what happens? What do?
What?
You see, bridging the gap between two activist causes, that would be women's rights and the rights for black people, in the 60s, by itself, that was not a bad thing. But the second they gave it a name and tried to worship the gods of intersectionality, there was already a problem. It is hard for me to articulate the nature of exemplifying some happening that you see as a good thing, and then trying to tell people that anything that slightly resembles this good thing will always be a good thing for the rest of eternity. But suffice it to say that this is basically always a bad idea. In the case of the inception of intersectionality, they mixed women with black people to create one ambidextrous activist group. You have black women who are black activists and feminists combined. And 1 + 1 = 2, and therefore it seemed from this one instance that they became greater than the sum of their parts, at least on paper. So we should all try to do this as often as possible, so we can be greater than the sum of our parts, right? That's the way we'll organize groups to save every individual, right? Unfortunately, herein lies the problem. Once you begin trying to map out a diagram that will attempt to speak truth to every individualized experience of every person on the entire planet by way of some theory or code of ethics, There will always be immediate exceptions to these rules, and your theory will merely become a way of justifying your behavior while forgetting about legitimately helping certain people, usually because your theory deems these people to not be needing of any help. Christianity and Islam both largely demonize the Jews, and of course, intersectionality demonizes white straight men. But of course, all things pretend to be a noble thing that looks out for the underdog, because the people who practice these things all think that they were the underdog, until they are middle-aged and simply aren't the underdog anymore, and when you start calling them on their bullshit, they just try to shut you down.
What?
Intersectionality, as a very basic idea, pretends to look out for the individualized struggles of people by taking into account their intersecting forms of hardship in life, and combining those hardships instead of simply looking at their hardships separately as individual monoliths. Or they'll say something like that. This is an easy sell to the gullible, because how could somebody not want to take into account everything about a person, from everybody's race, to their gender, to their sexuality, to their disability status? Only a monster would question this formula, right? It's such common sense that it's amazing that anybody ever lived without intersectionality, right? But see, that's exactly the problem. It is precisely common sense to know that every individual has their own specific set of problems in life, and we absolutely do not need a feminist theory to speak about that. In fact, the theory of intersectional feminism itself distorts our legitimate understanding of the struggles of individuals and groups, because the way the entire theory is framed happens to have it be held together by bigoted assumptions and sweeping generalizations. They claim to look out for the individualized oppressions of people by examining the various factors in their lives, but they do so by erasing circumstantial nuance from the playing field, and instead replacing it with a false theory that reduces one's advantages and disadvantages in life to a game of simple arithmetic where you get a simple +1 or -1 for any trait that you might have, no matter what context. And in this game of simple arithmetic, every trait you possess is either plus or minus, privileged or oppressed. There is no such thing as a neutral trait about yourself in the intersectional feminist theory. I'll use myself as an individual as an example to talk about my own forms of quote-unquote oppression. Disclaimer, I don't think that I have it particularly rough in life, but not exactly easy either. I just want to illustrate how complicated things are. I am a white male, and I was the youngest of 7 children, and by the time I was born, my parents were not getting along, and they divorced twice by the time I was 5. I never had a stable home life until high school, as I moved back and forth between each parent's house, constantly hearing bad things about the other parent from the other parent. Although I was exceptionally bright in school and was always in advanced studies after the 2nd grade, I was almost unanimously disliked by my teachers growing up, usually because I was loud and restless. I was a boy, of course, and they didn't like that in elementary school or middle school, so I learned to deeply mistrust authority because it mattered less that I actually did good work and more that I was noisy. I'd always do good enough to pass, but be deducted points for bad behavior, or really being a boy. There was little motivation to try hard to please authority, because it seemingly never worked. So I retreated to the arts and playing video games with friends. Growing up feeling like you can please your teachers if you try hard enough is a luxury I didn't have in adolescence. And I think that kind of messed me up a bit. Moving on to the positives, I came out as gay when I was 14 in a rough neighborhood, and oddly, a lot of my teachers liked me better all of the sudden, seemingly largely as a consequence of me being an open homosexual and having some amount of patience for my standard teenaged bullshittery. I guess because they felt sorry for my circumstances as a gay kid in a rough neighborhood or something? All of this was a circumstantial privilege that most people would not anticipate. I was at a hippie-like alternative high school, and I can assume it would have been different at most schools, which is a very key point to keep in mind when examining quote-unquote oppressions. I was dicked around as a young kid for being a boy, but then almost privileged later for being gay.
What?
Not that it's never sucked to be a gay guy. I'm not saying that. Don't worry, gay guys. I'm not a traitor. Later, I graduated college without student debt, have gotten a decent amount of financial help from my family, which has always left me feeling obligated to tirelessly reinvest into educating my peers, kind of like I do on YouTube. And I have always been able to live in liberal cities where I was never severely discriminated against for being gay, minus a few stupid online arguing sagas that happened during the Bush years. Unfortunately, it gets worse. Over the past 4 years especially, I have encountered a barrage of non-stop bigoted insults about my race as a white guy, my gender as a male, and even my sexuality coming from within my own circles. If I question the feminist narrative or the Black Lives Matter narrative, I am chastised for being a white male. And if I beat a straight white male social justice warrior in an argument, they've now taken to randomly bringing up my sexuality as a conversational weapon against me. They'll say, well, I guess gay guys can be fascists too. Look at Milo Yiannopoulos. When we weren't even talking about my sexuality in any way. I also have a treatable disability, which makes certain things that are very big that people take for granted very difficult for me. But I don't cry myself to sleep over it because I like being me. That all said, I have an extremely complicated life full of advantages and disadvantages. Sure, it was great that I was able to get money for college from my family, and I'll be the first to admit that. But it was kind of a bummer to be raised basically my entire life not to trust anybody because both of my parents at least heavily implied that the other parent was evil. And my two sisters closest in age to myself are even more paranoid and messed up by all of this than I am, so they have never really been much help. Things have a tendency to even out, and honestly, I'm about 98% confident that the reason my family ended up helping me out financially with college and stuff was because they all felt guilty that I didn't really get to have a childhood. But whatever, I'm over it. Still, an intersectional feminist does not see that stuff. They just want to look at my Facebook picture and gender and see me as being advantaged by being white and male, but disadvantaged by being gay. If I'm lucky, they'll rub it in my face that I've been privileged financially because somebody told them about that. But good luck getting them to legitimately examine what my childhood was actually like. They don't care about me, they know it, and I know it. They just want to dismiss me when I get in the way of their creepy plans, which is often. Sure, these people will pretend to see the nuances of my life on a person-to-person basis if it comes up, just so long as it's convenient for them as individuals. And if you show any signs that you might succumb to falling in line with their philosophy, which is completely cultish in nature, they'll ask you for your life story and pretend to care all about your intersecting oppressions. Still, ultimately, you'll always just be a number to them, and you will have to fall into rank based on your number. Are you a black lesbian? Well, you're a +3 in the intersectional army. You are given a +1 in oppression points for being a woman, for being queer, and for being black. Are you a white, straight male? You are a -3. You are given a -1 for being white, male, and straight. I, as a gay white male, am treated as a -1, generally, by intersectional feminists. The only thing keeping me from being a -3 is that I got a +1 instead of a -1 for being a gay male. And remember, there is no such thing as neutrality in this philosophy. For every trait you exhibit to the collective, you are given either a +1 or a -1. Though intersectional feminists will definitely try to argue with me here, I have learned the following. I am considered exactly as worthy as an individual of having an opinion as a straight white woman, if not less. Because although she loses 1 point for being straight, she gains 1 for being a woman. And that 1 point for being a woman could almost count as 2, but they pretend it doesn't. And if you want to argue with these people, good luck trying to explain to them that I have a disability or that I had a uniquely irritating childhood. They'll always have some sort of story about this girl's uncle touching her one time or whatever. She might even fabricate it entirely, and she'll certainly probably lie about her financial class, because it seems like every upper middle class woman now comes from a working class family according to them. While these people claim to care about the hardships of individuals, they'll do everything they can to wrap you up into neat little boxes where they can easily categorize you. And if you make too much noise, they'll match your noise with noise of their own to silence you, even if their noise is entirely bullshit. That all said, there is no redeeming this philosophy as a concept at all. The only way to care about individuals or even the collective struggles of groups is to have common sense. Be a good listener and take things as they come. There is no goddamn formula for being a good person the way intersectional feminists pretend that there is. And the second you fall in line with that type of thinking, the second somebody will mock you, and you will end up calling that person a sinner or a misogynist or now a fascist, and you'll end up looking like this.
What?
The choice is yours for how you proceed into the rest of your life. So, yeah, be a good person. That's all. It's that easy. Drop me a comment. Help me out on Patreon if this speaks to you in any way, and stay tuned.